Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep, deep into the life and times of, well, Andrew Jackson.
Oh, yeah. He's quite a figure.
He really is. And, we've got Jon Meacham's American Lion with us. Just some excerpts to kind of help guide this deep dive.
Yeah. Great book.
It is. So, he's both revered and reviled. Why is that? Why is Andrew Jackson still so controversial?
Yeah, well, I mean, his story really starts, in hardship.
Oh,
A
absolutely.
lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, born into poverty, and his father died right before he was born.
Right.
So he's essentially an orphan,
Yeah.
shuffled between relatives. I always think about that.
Right.
Like, how does that shape a person not having that stable home?
Well, I think Meacham really hits this point home that it kind of fostered this self-reliance.
Oh, yeah, he had to figure things out for himself.
But that can also lead to some stubbornness.
Yeah, could that have played into some of his decisions as president?
Maybe. And that drive that we see, it emerges in his military career where he wanted to make his mark.
And he did.
Oh, the Battle of New Orleans.
Huge.
Yeah, that made him famous across the country.
I mean, national hero.
Yeah.
But his personal life also had a huge impact on him and how everything kind of went. And Meacham talks about the 1828 election where his wife Rachel was so viciously attacked.
Oh, it was relentless, just, bigamy accusations, all sorts of just awful attacks on her character.
Wow.
It was a really tragic element of his story.
And then she dies just weeks before he takes office.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, how do you even process that?
Imagine that kind of grief and anger. It's just, wow.
Yeah. I mean, it makes you think about, like, what does that do to a person?
Right.
And then, it wasn't all, I mean, he was a complex guy.
Yeah.
Alongside that temper, Meacham talks about how he had this deep religious devotion.
It's fascinating. It makes you think, was it a source of comfort?
Or did it, give him a little bit more like righteous anger?
That conviction, yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely something to think about.
And speaking of that temper, Meacham talks about how even as a kid, as a teenager, he nearly killed a man for threatening him.
Yeah. That was the frontier.
Right.
Violence was just part of life.
So you've got this future president, this war hero, this man of God who is quick to anger, okay with using force. What a complex character.
Does stop there.
No.
Drawn to the law, but also gambling, horse racing.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what do you think it was about him that drew people in?
Maybe it was that risk-taking, that ambition. He wasn't afraid to be bold.
He was challenging those conventions.
Yeah.
So we've got, his early life. We see how it shaped him, but how did that prepare him to actually lead a nation?
That's what we'll get into next time.
Yeah.
We're going to explore his presidency, all the drama, all those policies, that legacy that, people are still arguing about.
Yeah,
It gets really interesting.
it does. Stay with us. We're going to unpack the age of Jackson.
The age of Jackson, yeah.
Okay, so Jackson's presidency, the people's president, right? But he also had some pretty strong opposition. What made him so polarizing as a leader?
Well, I mean, his policies, a lot of them were very personal, like they came from his experiences, his beliefs.
And that led to some friction.
Oh, yeah, he wasn't afraid to challenge, the powers that be.
Let's get into some of those policies. Meacham really focuses on three big ones. The first one, Indian removal.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Driven by Jackson's, his belief in westward expansion and state sovereignty.
So he pushed for relocating those Native American tribes.
Yeah, basically to make way for white settlement.
It's hard to square that with the people's president idea. How did he justify uprooting entire communities, especially after what he went through as a kid?
It's a big question. Historians are still debating it. Some say, he really thought he was helping both sides, the settlers and the Native Americans. Thought it would prevent conflict.
But I mean, the Trail of Tears.
Right? That's the tragic outcome. Thousands died on those forced marches. It's a dark stain on his legacy.
Definitely. Okay, let's move on to the nullification crisis. So South Carolina wanted to nullify a federal tariff law.
Oh, yeah, that was a direct challenge. He believed in a strong federal government.
And a strong union.
Right. He saw this as a threat, a real threat.
So he didn't back down.
Not at all. Threatened military action if they didn't comply.
Wow. So he was ready to fight, even against the state, to keep the union together? But wasn't he also a states' rights guy sometimes?
It's complicated. He wanted balance, but when it came to the nation's survival, he was willing to use, the full power of his office.
To protect the union. All right, let's talk about the bank war. This was Jackson's fight against, what was it, the Second Bank of the United States?
Yeah, the second bank. He saw it as this symbol of concentrated power,
Hmm.
the wealthy elite benefiting at the expense of everyone
He
else.
really distrusted those big
He
institutions.
did. He thought they favored the few over the many.
Makes you wonder if his own experience with poverty, with hardship, kind of fueled that fight.
Maybe. He definitely saw himself as someone who had to protect the common man.
Yeah, and stand up to those elites. And, his presidency was just full of drama. I mean, there were even rumors of assassination plots against him.
Oh, yeah. He was a really polarizing figure. Some people, they loved him. They saw him as like this symbol of American resilience.
But others, they saw him as a tyrant.
Yeah, they thought he abused his power.
So we've talked about the policies, the politics, but what about Jackson, the man? What was his personal life like outside of all that drama?
Well, Meacham does give us some insight into that. He was really devoted to his wife, Rachel, even though their marriage, had some controversy surrounding it.
And after she died, he never really let go of that grief.
Now, he blamed his enemies for, the pain they caused her.
And he had a complicated relationship with his adopted son.
That's right, Andrew Jr. It was a mix of, I guess, affection, but also a lot of political maneuvering,
Yeah.
a side of him we don't always see.
So he's a warrior, he's a devoted husband, he's a populist, but he's also this shrewd politician.
Yeah, he's full of these contradictions. And those contradictions, that's what makes his legacy so interesting. You can't just call him a hero or a villain.
Well,
Right.
he was a product of his time for sure, but how do we weigh those triumphs and those tragedies?
That's the challenge. It's complicated. But it's also why studying history is so important. It's not just about the facts and dates. It's about trying to understand these people, these individuals who lived through these times.
Their motivations, their decisions.
Right, and how those decisions shaped the world we live in.
It's amazing how even now people are still debating, the things Jackson did. It just shows how much of an impact he had.
Oh yeah, he really changed things for sure. I
Yeah.
mean, you could see his influence everywhere, like on democracy, how it works, even the power of the president.
But those changes, they weren't always good, right?
Right. It's like he was this force, this powerful force. And yeah, sometimes it left things better, sometimes not.
It makes you think about how, history isn't just about heroes and villains.
Exactly. It's about real people living in their own times, facing their own problems. And yeah, they made choices that still affect us today.
And it shows that even the people we admire, they can make big mistakes. And even people we disagree with, well, sometimes they did good things too.
It's true. And it's about like understanding how all those choices, good or bad, well, they're still important, even hundreds of years later.
Thinking about Jackson and the presidency, it's clear he made it, well, more powerful. He wasn't afraid to use his veto, to challenge Congress, to really be the voice of the people.
He really saw himself as like their representative, not for the special interests or the politicians. And that let him do some pretty bold things, like taking down that second bank, even when powerful people were against it.
It's almost like he redefined what it meant to be president, showing future presidents how to use that power in ways that no one really thought of before.
Yeah, and those examples, well, they're still relevant. Like even
Yeah.
today, we're still figuring out, the limits of what a president can do. And some of those questions come from what Jackson did back then.
That's wild. So we're still dealing with like the echoes of Jackson's choices all these years later.
I think so. And that's what makes history so interesting, right?
Hmm.
It's not just stories from the past. It's a force, it's alive, and it's still shaping us now, and it'll shape the future too.
It's like this conversation that goes on through all these generations, each one adding their own thoughts and opinions.
I like that. And that's why it's so important to look at history, to really question things, challenge the old stories, be open to new ideas as we learn more.
I think that's a great point for our listeners. Don't just take things at face value. Go deeper, find different sources, and come to your own conclusions about Jackson, about all the people who've shaped history.
That's the best way to really get it, to
Well,
understand the past and what it means for us now. And who knows, maybe you'll find something that changes how you see the whole world.
so we've gone from his tough childhood to the battles, the White House, his whole complicated story. Andrew Jackson, a man of contradictions, a man of his time, and someone whose impact is still felt today.
His story reminds us that history, it's never simple. It's messy. It's hard to put people into neat little boxes, good or bad. It makes us think hard, face those uncomfortable parts of the past, and realize that the choices people make, they really do last.
Thanks for joining us as we dove into the life and legacy of Andrew Jackson.
We hope you've learned something new and maybe even have more questions about this really fascinating and sometimes confusing guy.
Remember, history's an adventure, so keep searching, keep asking those questions, and keep digging into the past. We'll be back soon with another dive into history, focusing on someone new, someone just as interesting. Until then, keep learning.
Loved this video? Smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. And don't forget to order the book, link below.